In today's video, we take you to the hero of Islam who fought 120 wars and did not lose even one. If death happens, I would never have lost my life on the bed, so you know about this great Muslim hero in the video, so stay inside the video and get light from the life situations and events of a great army leader. Try to do. Khalid bin Waleed. Khalid ibn al-Walid ibn al-Mughira al-Makhzumi, Arabic, Romanized, Khalid ibn al-Walid ibn al-Mughira al-Makhzumi, died 642, was a 7th century Arab military commander. He first directed campaigns against Hazrat Muhammad on behalf of the Quraysh. He then became a Muslim and spent the rest of his career serving Hazrat Muhammad and the first two Rashidun caliphs, Abu Bakr and Umar. Khalid was the principal commander in the Ridda Wars against rebel tribes in Arabia, 632 to 633, the earliest operations in Sasanian Iraq, 633 to 634, and the conquest of Byzantine Syria, 634 to 638. Khalid, a horseman from the Quraysh's aristocratic Banu Makhzum line, which vehemently opposed Muhammad, played an important part in defeating Hazrat Muhammad and his troops at the Battle of Uhud in 625. In 627 or 629, he converted to Islam in front of Hazrat Muhammad. He was enrolled as an official military leader among Muslims and given the title Sef Allah, lit. Sword of God. During the Battle of Mu'tah, Khalid oversaw the safe withdrawal of Muslim troops from the Byzantine forces. He also led the Bedouins in the Muslim army's conquest of Mecca from 629 to 630, as well as the Battle of Hunain. Following Muhammad's death, Khalid was assigned to Najd and al-Yamama with the goal of suppressing or subjugating Arab tribes that opposed the fledgling Muslim state. This campaign culminated in Khalid's victory over Arab rebel leaders Tulayha and Muzaylima at the Battle of Buzaka in 632 and the Battle of Yamama in 633, respectively. Khalid then attacked the predominantly Christian Arab tribes and Sasanian Persian garrisons in Iraq's Euphrates Valley. He was appointed by Abu Bakr to lead the Muslim troops in Syria, where he led his men on an unusual march across a lengthy, waterless stretch of the Syrian desert, enhancing his reputation as a military strategist. The Rashidun army seized the majority of the Levant when Khalid commanded key victories against the Byzantines at Ajnadain, 634, Fal, 634 or 635, Damascus, 634 to 635, and Yarmouk, 636. Umar degraded Khalid and removed him from the army's high command. Khalid remained a vital lieutenant for his successor, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, during the sieges of Homs and Aleppo, as well as the Battle of Kinisrin, all in 637 to 638. These engagements led to the withdrawal of Imperial Byzantine soldiers from Syria under Emperor Heraclius. Umar then removed Khalid as governor of Jund Kinisrin around 638. Khalid died in either Medina or Homs in 642. He is widely regarded by historians as one of the most experienced and talented generals of the early Islamic era, and he is also venerated across the Arab world. Islamic tradition praises Khalid for his battlefield tactics and effective leadership during the early Muslim conquests, but accuses him of illegally executing Arab tribesmen who had accepted Islam, specifically, members of the Banu Jadima during Hazrat Muhammad's lifetime and Malik ibn Nuwayra during the Ridda Wars, as well as being responsible for moral and fiscal misconduct in the Levant. Khalid's military fame alarmed some of the religious early Muslims, most notably Umar, who worried it would lead to a personality cult. Ancestry and early life. Khalid's father was al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, an arbiter of local conflicts in Mecca, Hijaz, Western Arabia. The historians Ibn Hisham, d. 833, Ibn Durayd, d. 837, and Ibn Habib, d. 859, identify al-Walid as the derider of the Islamic prophet Muhammad recorded in the Meccan surahs, chapters, of the Quran. He belonged to the Banu Makhzum, a prominent clan of the Quraysh tribe and Mecca's pre-Islamic elite. The Makhzum are credited with introducing Meccan commerce to other markets, particularly Yemen and Abyssinia, Ethiopia, and they established a reputation among the Quraysh for their intelligence, nobility, and wealth. Their importance was due to the leadership of Khalid's paternal grandfather, Al-Mughira ibn Abi Diala. Khalid's paternal uncle Hisham was recognized as the Lord of Mecca, and the Quraysh used his death date to mark the start of their calendar. According to historian Muhammad Abdulhay Shaban, Khalid is a man of considerable standing within his clan and in Mecca as a whole. Khalid's mother was Al-Asma bint al-Harith ibn Hazan, also known as Lubaba al-Sugra, Lubaba the Younger, to differentiate her from her elder half-sister Lubaba al-Kubra, of the nomadic Banu Hilal family. Lubaba al-Sugra converted to Islam around 622, and her paternal half-sister Maymuna later married Muhammad. Khalid grew well-versed in the Bedouin, nomadic Arab, lifestyle thanks to his maternal ties. Early military career. Opposition to Muhammad. The Makhzum tribe, led by Amr ibn Hisham, Abu Jahl, Khalid's first cousin, boycotted Muhammad's clan, the Banu Hashim of Quraysh, about 616 to 618. Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina in 622, and the Makhzum, led by Abu Jahl, fought him until they were defeated at the Battle of Badr in 624. Approximately 25 of Khalid's paternal cousins, including Abu Jahl, and several more kinsmen were killed in that engagement. The next year, Khalid led the right flank of the cavalry in the Meccan army that faced Muhammad in the Battle of Uhud north of Medina. According to historian Donald Routledge Hill, rather than attacking the Muslim lines on the slopes of Mount Uhud, Khalid adopted the sound tactics of moving around the mountain and bypassing the Muslim side that he pushed across the Wadi Kennet valley west of Uhud until being stopped by Muslim archers south of the valley at Mount Ruma. The Muslims took an early lead in the battle, but after the majority of the Muslim archers abandoned their positions to join the raid on the Meccan camp, Khalid stormed against the resulting breach in the Muslims' rear defensive lines. Several dozen Muslims were slain during the ensuing rout. The battle narratives describe Khalid galloping through the field, slaughtering Muslims with his lance. Shaban attributes Khalid's military genius with the Quraysh's victory at Uhud, the tribe's lone defeat of Muhammad. In 628, Muhammad and his followers left for Mecca to make the Umrah, lesser pilgrimage to Mecca, and the Quraysh deployed 200 cavalry to intercept them. Khalid led the cavalry, and Muhammad avoided confrontation by taking an unexpected and arduous secondary route, eventually arriving at Hudaybiyah on the outskirts of Mecca. Khalid fled to Mecca when he realized Muhammad had changed his mind. In March, the Muslims and Quraysh signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which established a truce. Conversion to Islam and service under Muhammad. Khalid and Amr ibn al-As converted to Islam in Muhammad's presence in either 6 c.627, or 8 c.629. According to modern historian Michael Lecker, the traditions that Khalid and Amr converted in 8 are perhaps more trustworthy. According to historian Akram Dia Amari, Khalid and Amr converted to Islam and moved to Medina during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, reportedly after the Quraysh dropped their demands for the repatriation of newer Muslim converts to Mecca. According to historian Hugh N. Kennedy, Khalid began to devote all of his considerable military talents to the support of the new Muslim state after his conversion. In September 629, Muhammad ordered an expedition to Mu'tah in modern-day Jordan, and Khalid took part. The raid's objective could have been to seize booty after the Sasanian Persian army fled Syria following its defeat by the Byzantine Empire in July. A Byzantine force led by Byzantine commander Theodore, composed primarily of Arab tribesmen, routed the Muslim detachment, killing numerous high-ranking Muslim officers. Following the deaths of the chosen leaders, Khalid took charge of the army and directed the Muslims' safe escape, albeit with great difficulty. Hazrat Muhammad awarded Khalid with the honorific title Saif Allah, the Sword of God. Khalid helped Muhammad seize Mecca in December 629 or January 630, and the majority of the Quraysh converted to Islam as a result. In that fight, Khalid headed a nomadic group known as Muhajirat al-Arab, the Bedouin immigrants. He led one of the two main drives into the city, and in the subsequent combat with the Quraysh, 3 of his men were killed, while 12 Qurayshites were killed, according to Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad's 8th-century biographer. Khalid led the Bedouin Banu Sulaim in the Muslim vanguard at the Battle of Hunain later that year. In that fight, the Muslims, bolstered by the inflow of Qurayshite converts, destroyed the Thaqif, the Quraysh's traditional adversaries centered in Taif, and their nomadic Hawazin allies. Khalid was subsequently tasked with destroying the idol of Al-Uzza, one of the goddesses worshipped in pre-Islamic Arabian religion, in the Nakhla region between Mecca and Taif. Khalid was later sent to invite the Banu Jadima to Islam at Yalamlam, some 80 kilometers, 50 miles, south of Mecca, although Islamic traditional texts claim that he invaded the tribe illegally. According to Ibn Ishaq, Khalid persuaded the Jadima tribesmen to disarm and accept Islam, after which he executed a number of them in retaliation for the Jadima's murder of his uncle Faqih ibn al-Mughira, which occurred prior to Khalid's conversion to Islam. According to Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, died in 1449, Khalid misinterpreted the tribesmen's adoption of the faith as a rejection or denigration of Islam due to his unfamiliarity with the Jadima accent and thus attacked them. In both stories, Muhammad declared himself innocent of Khalid's actions but did not release or punish him. According to historian W. Montgomery Watt, the conventional version of the Jadima episode is hardly more than a circumstantial denigration of Khalid, and yields little solid historical fact. Later, in 630, while Muhammad was in Tabuk, he sent Khalid to seize the oasis market town of Dumat al-Jandal. Khalid forced its surrender and imposed a severe punishment on the town's inhabitants, one of whom, the Kindite Yuqadir ibn Abd al-Malik al-Sakuni, was commanded by Khalid to sign the capitulation deal with Muhammad in Medina. In June 631, Muhammad dispatched Khalid with 480 men to invite the mixed Christian and polytheistic Balharith tribe of Najran to accept Islam. The tribe converted, and Khalid taught them the Quran and Islamic laws before returning to Muhammad in Medina with a Balharith delegation. Commander in the Ridda Wars. Following Muhammad's death in June 632, one of his early and close friends, Abu Bakr, was appointed caliph, head of the Muslim community. The topic of succession had sparked disagreement among Muslims. The Ansar, the residents of Medina who welcomed Muhammad after his flight from Mecca, sought to elect their own leader. The Muhajirin, primarily Qurayshite natives of Mecca who emigrated with Muhammad to Medina, held differing opinions. One faction argued for a companion closer in relation to Muhammad, notably his cousin Ali, while another group, supported by fresh converts from the Qurayshite aristocracy, rallied around Abu Bakr. The latter, with the critical intervention of senior Muhajirin, Umar ibn al-Khattab and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, overruled the Ansar and acceded. Khalid was a strong supporter of Abu Bakr's succession. According to a story recorded in a work by the 13th century scholar Ibn Abi al-Hadid, Khalid was an Abu Bakr supporter, opposed Ali's candidacy, and said that Abu Bakr was not a man about whom one needs to inquire, and his character needs not be sounded out. Except for those who lived near Mecca, Medina, and Taif, the majority of Arabian tribes abandoned their allegiance to the emerging Muslim state following Muhammad's death or never established formal links with Medina. According to Islamic historiography, Abu Bakr's efforts to establish or re-establish Islamic dominion over the tribes are known as the Ridda Wars, wars against the apostates. Modern historians hold widely differing perspectives on the wars. What agrees with the Islamic definition of the tribal opposition as anti-Islamic in nature, although Julius Wellhausen and C.H. Becker argue that the tribes were hostile to Medina's tax responsibilities rather than Islam itself. According to Leon Caetani and Bernard Lewis, the opposing tribes that had established ties with Medina viewed their religious and fiscal obligations as a personal contract with Muhammad. Their attempts to negotiate different terms after his death were rejected by Abu Bakr, who went on to launch campaigns against them. Two of the 6 major combat zones in Arabia during the Ridda Wars were focused in Najd, the Central Arabian Plateau Taleha's rebellion of the Asad, Tay, and Ghatafan tribes and Sajah's uprising of the Tamim tribe. Both leaders claimed to be prophets. After defeating the Ghatafan in the Battle of Dhu al-Qasa, Abu Bakr sent Khalid against the rebel tribes of Najd. Khalid was Abu Bakr's third option to head the war after the first two, Zayd ibn al-Khattab and Abu Hudhayfa ibn Utbah, declined the position. His forces were gathered from both the Muhajirin and the Ansar. Throughout the fight, Khalid displayed great operational independence and did not strictly adhere to the caliph's orders. Shaban stated that he simply defeated whoever was there to be defeated. Battle of Buzaka. Khalid's initial priority was to suppress Talayha's following. In late 632, he faced Talayha's army at the Battle of Buzaka, which took place near the namesake well in Asad territory, where the tribes were camped. The Tay switched to the Muslims before Khalid's men arrived in Buzaka, thanks to mediation between the two sides by Tay chief Adi ibn Hatim. Medina had appointed the latter as tax collector for his tribe and its traditional Asad adversaries. Khalid defeated the Asad Ghatafan army in combat. When Talayha appeared to be defeated, the Fazara branch of the Ghatafan, led by Uyana ibn Hizn, abandoned the battlefield, forcing Talayha to flee to Syria. His tribe, the Asad, eventually succumbed to Khalid, followed by the formerly neutral Banu Amir, which had waited for the outcome of the fight before pledging allegiance to either side. Uyana was caught and transported to Medina. As a result of their victory at Buzaka, the Muslims acquired control of the majority of Najd. Execution of Malik ibn Nuwayra. Following Buzaka, Khalid pursued the rebel Tamimite chieftain Malik ibn Nuwayra, who was based in Al-Buda, in today's Qasim province. Malik had been assigned by Muhammad as the Sadaqa, alms tax, collector for his Tamim clan, the Yarbo, but after Muhammad's death, he stopped transmitting this fee to Medina. Abu Bakr then resolved to have Khalid execute him. The latter experienced internal differences within his army during this expedition, with the Ansar initially remaining behind, citing Abu Bakr's instructions not to campaign farther until receiving a direct order from the Caliph. Khalid claimed that such an order was within his authority as the Caliph's commander, but he did not force the Ansar to participate, instead continuing his march with troops from the Muhajirin and Bedouin defectors from Buzaka and its aftermath. The Ansar eventually rejoined Khalid after internal deliberations. According to the most widely accepted story in Muslim traditional texts, Khalid's army met Malik and 11 of his clansmen from the Yarbu in 632. The Yarbu did not resist, declared their Muslim religion, and were led to Khalid's camp. Khalid murdered them all over the opposition of an Ansarite who had been one of the tribesmen's captors and argued for the captives' inviolability based on their Muslim testaments. Later, Khalid married Malik's widow, Tamim bint al-Minhal. When news of Khalid's conduct reached Medina, Umar, Abu Bakr's main advisor, urged for Khalid's punishment or removal from command, but Abu Bakr pardoned him. According to the story of the 8th century historian Sef ibn Umar, Malik had also been cooperating with the Prophet Asaja, his Yarbu kinswoman, but after they were defeated by competing Tamim clans, he abandoned her cause and fled to his camp at Al-Buda. The Muslims approached him and his tiny party. According to Wilfred Madelung, a modern historian, Umar and other Muslims would not have protested Khalid's execution of Malik if he had left Islam. Watt also believes that accounts about the Tamim during the Ridda are obscure, partly because the enemies of Khalid bin Waleed have twisted the stories to blacken him. According to modern historian Landau Tassarin, the truth behind Malik's career and death will remain buried under a heap of conflicting traditions. Elimination of Musaylima and capture of Yamama. Following a series of losses in her struggle with rival Tamim factions, Saja joined the Muslims' most powerful opponent, Musaylima, the chief of the sedentary Banu Hanifa clan in the Yamama, 38, Najd's agricultural eastern frontiers. Musaylima had claimed prophethood before to Muhammad's departure from Mecca, and his pleas for Muhammad to recognize his supernatural revelation were rebuffed by Muhammad. After Muhammad's death, support for Musaylima increased in the Yamama, whose strategic worth lay not only in its wealth of wheat fields and date palms but also its location, which connects Medina to the eastern Arabian areas of Bahrain and Oman. Abu Bakr had sent Shurabil ibn Hazana and Khalid's cousin Ikrima with an army to support the Muslim governor of the Yamama, Musaylima's tribal kinsman Thumama ibn Uthal. According to modern historian Mayor Jacob Kister, the threat presented by this army undoubtedly forced Musaylima to form an alliance with Saja. Musaylima's men resisted Ikrima, who was then sent by Abu Bakr to crush rebellions in Oman and Mara, central southern Arabia, while Shurabil was to remain in the Yamama in anticipation of Khalid's big army. Following his triumphs over the Bedouin of Najd, Khalid traveled to the Yamama with warnings of the Hanifas' military prowess and instructions from Abu Bakr to punish the tribe if he won. According to the 12th century historian Ibn Hubaysh al-Asadi, Khalid and Musaylima's armies were 4,500 and 4,000 strong, respectively. Kister dismisses the significantly larger figures stated in most early Muslim accounts as exaggerations. Khalid's first 3 assaults on Musaylima on the plain of Akraba were repulsed. The Muslims blamed their initial setbacks on the strength of Musaylima's troops, the superiority of their swords, and the erratic behavior of the Bedouin contingents in Khalid's forces. Khalid followed the advice of the Ansarite Thabit ibn Qais and excluded the Bedouins from the next conflict. During the 4th assault on the Hanifa, the Muhajirin under Khalid and the Ansar under Thabit killed a lieutenant of Musaylima, who fled with a portion of his force. The Muslims chased the Hanifa to a vast enclosed garden, where Musaylima staged a last stand against them. The Muslims assaulted the enclosure, killing Musaylima and wounding the majority of the Hanifites. The enclosure became known as the Garden of Doom, because to the high casualty rate on both sides. Khalid tasked Mujay ibn al-Murara, a Hanifite captured early in the fight, with assessing the Hanifa's strength, morale, and intentions in their Yamama fortresses following Musaylima's death. Mujay had the tribe's women and children dress up and pose as men at the fort's openings in order to gain leverage with Khalid. He informed Khalid that the Hanifa still had a large number of warriors determined to fight the Muslims. This assessment, combined with the tiredness of his own troops, forced Khalid to accept Mujay's advice on a ceasefire with the Hanifa, despite Abu Bakr's orders to pursue retreating Hanifites and execute Hanifite prisoners of war. Khalid's stipulations with the Hanifa required the tribe to convert to Islam and hand over their weapons, armor, and gold and silver stockpiles. Abu Bakr approved the contract, but he resisted Khalid's concessions and warned that the Hanifa would be eternally loyal to Musaylima. Khalid's marriage to Mujay's daughter added to the treaty's legitimacy. According to Lecker, Mujay's ploy may have been established by Islamic tradition, in order to protect Khalid's policy because the negotiated treaty caused the Muslims great losses. Khalid was given an orchard and a field in each village that signed the pact with the Hanifa, but the villages that did not sign were punished. Among these settlements were Musaylima's hometowns, Al-Hadar and Marat, whose residents were banished or enslaved, and the villages were rebuilt with tribesmen from Tamim clans. End of the Ridda Wars. The traditional sources place the definitive suppression of the Arab tribes of the Ridda Wars around March 633, but Kaitani maintains that the operations must have continued until 634. The tribes of Bahrain may have resisted the Muslims until the middle of 634. A number of early Islamic texts attribute Khalid's role on the Bahrain front to his victory over the Hanifa. Shufani believes this is unlikely, but he does not rule out the possibility that Khalid had previously dispatched detachments from his army to support the senior Muslim commander in Bahrain, Al-Ala al-Hadrami. The Muslim war operations, in which Khalid played an important role, ensured Medina's supremacy over the powerful tribes of Arabia, who sought to undermine Islamic rule in the peninsula, and restored the nascent Muslim state's prestige. According to Lecker, Khalid and the other Qurayshite generals gained precious experience, during the Ridda Wars, in mobilizing large multi-tribal armies over long distances, and benefited from the close acquaintance of the Quraysh, with tribal politics throughout Arabia. Campaigns in Iraq. Khalid marched north towards Sasanian territory in Iraq, Lower Mesopotamia, after pacifying the Yamama. He reformed his army, maybe because the majority of the Muhajirin had withdrawn to Medina. According to historian Khalil Athamana, the remains of Khalid's army were nomadic Arabs from Medina's surrounds, whose chiefs were recruited to fill the vacant command posts left by the Sahaba, companions of Muhammad. According to historian Fred Donner, the Muhajirin and Ansar were the core of his army, together with a considerable proportion of nomadic Arabs, most likely from the Muzayna, Tamim, Asad, and Ghatafan tribes. Khalid's assigned tribal contingent commanders were Adi ibn Hatim of the Tay and Asim ibn Amr of the Tamim. In late spring or early summer 633, he arrived at the southern Iraqi boundary with approximately 1,000 troops. Khalid's invasion targeted the western banks of the Euphrates River and the nomadic Arabs who lived there. The details of the campaign's itinerary are varied in early Muslim sources, although Donner claims that the general course of Khalid's progress in the first part of his campaigning in Iraq can be quite clearly traced. According to al-Baladuri and Khalifa ibn Khayyat's 9th century histories, Khalid's first major battle in Iraq was his victory over the Sasanian garrison at Abulla, ancient Apologos, near modern Basra, and the nearby village of Kurayba, though al-Tabari, d. 923. Considers the attribution of victory to Khalid to be incorrect and that Abulla was conquered later by Utbah ibn Ghazwan al-Mazini. Donner believes Utbah conquered the town somewhat later than 634. However, historian Khalid Yahya Blankenship suggests Khalid may have conducted an attack there, even if Utbah reduced the region. Against Abulla, Khalid marched up the western bank of the Euphrates, where he engaged with the minor Sasanian garrisons that guarded the Iraqi frontier against nomadic invasions. The confrontations took place at Dat al-Salasil, Nar al-Mare, a canal connecting the Euphrates and Tigris just north of Abulla, Madhar, a village several days north of Abulla, Olais, possibly Valagizia's historic trading hub, and Walaja. The final two locations were near Al-Hira, a largely Arab market town and the Sasanian administrative hub for the Middle Euphrates Valley. The capturing of Al-Hira was Khalid's most major victory in the battle. After defeating the city's Persian cavalry under Commander Azadbi in small battles, Khalid and a portion of his army entered the unwalled city. Al-Hira's Arab tribal lords, many of whom were Nestorian Christians with blood ties to nomadic tribes on the city's western desert outskirts, sealed themselves in their scattered fortified mansions. Meanwhile, the rest of Khalid's army raided the villages in Al-Hira's orbit, several of which were taken or surrendered on tributary terms with the Muslims. The Arab nobles of Al-Hira surrendered in an agreement with Khalid in which the city paid a tribute in exchange for assurances that its churches and palaces would not be damaged. The annual payment to be paid by Al-Hira was 60,000, or 90,000 silver dirhams, which Khalid brought to Medina, establishing the Caliphate's first tribute from Iraq. During the fights in and around Al-Hira, Khalid gained crucial help from Al-Mutana ibn Harida and his Shayban tribe, who had been raiding this frontier for a long time before Khalid's arrival, though it is unclear whether Al-Mutana's prior exploits were related to the emerging Muslim state. After Khalid left, he left Al-Mutana in charge of Al-Hira and its surroundings. During the fights at Abulla and Walaja, he got similar aid from the Sadis clan of the Dul tribe under Qutbah ibn Qatada, as well as the Al tribe under Al-Madyar ibn Adi. None of these tribes, all of which were branches of the Banu Bakr Confederation, supported Khalid when he operated outside of their tribal boundaries. Khalid moved northward along the Euphrates Valley, attacking Anbar on the river's east bank and securing capitulation terms from the Sasanian commander. After that, he ravaged the nearby market villages, which were frequented by tribesmen from the Bakr and Qudayy confederations, before marching on to Ain al-Tamr, an oasis town west of the Euphrates and about 90 kilometers, 56 miles, south of Anbar. Khalid received fierce resistance from the Namir tribesmen, forcing him to besiege the town's fortress. The Namir were led by Hilal ibn Akka, a Christian leader who collaborated with the Sasanians and was crucified after Khalid defeated him. Ain al-Tamr surrendered, and Khalid took the town of Sandata to the north. By this period, Khalid had subjugated the western portions of the lower Euphrates and nomadic tribes, including the Namir, Taglib, Iyad, and Taymalit, and most of the Isle, as well as the settled Arab tribesmen, which resided there. Modern assessments. Athamana questions the Islamic traditional story that Abu Bakr commanded Khalid to initiate a campaign in Iraq, citing Abu Bakr's lack of interest in Iraq at a period when the Muslim state's forces were primarily focused on conquering Syria. Unlike Syria, Iraq was not the focus of Muhammad's or the early Muslims' objectives, and the Quraysh did not have pre-Islamic economic interests in the region, as they had in Syria. According to Shaban, it is unknown if Khalid requested or gained Abu Bakr's permission to assault Iraq, or whether he ignored the caliph's concerns. According to Athamina, traditional sources indicate that Khalid launched the campaign independently, meaning that the return of Khalid's Muhajirin to Medina following Musaylima's loss was most likely a protest of Khalid's intentions in Iraq. According to Shaban, the tribesmen who remained in Khalid's army were driven by the chance of war plunder, especially given Arabia's economic difficulties following the Ridda battles. According to Fred Donner, Khalid's primary purpose in Iraq may have been to subjugate Arab tribes, and confrontations with Persian troops were an unavoidable, if unintended, consequence of the tribe's alliance with the Sasanian Empire. Kennedy saw Khalid's advance toward Iraq's desert frontier as a natural continuation of his work subduing the tribes of northeastern Arabia, and it was consistent with Medina's objective of bringing all nomadic Arab tribes under its dominion. Madelung claims Abu Bakr relied on the Qurayshite elite during the Ridda Wars and early Muslim conquests, and speculates that the Caliph sent Khalid to Iraq to secure the Maksum's interest in the region. Modern historians dispute the degree of Khalid's contribution in the conquest of Iraq. According to Patricia Crone, contemporary non-Arabic sources such as the Armenian Chronicle of Sebios, c.661, and the Khuzestan Chronicle, c.680, refute the idea that Khalid played a part in the Iraqi conflict. The former only references Arab forces being sent to take Iraq after the Muslim conquest of Syria had already begun, as opposed to before, as held by traditional Islamic sources, whereas the latter only identifies Khalid as the conqueror of Syria. Crone sees the conventional reports as part of a larger trend in the predominantly Iraq-based, Abbasid-era, post-750, sources to reduce the early Muslims' emphasis on Syria in favor of Iraq. R. Stephen Humphreys considers Crone's assessment a radical critique of the traditional sources, while Khalid Yahya Blankenship calls it too one-sided. The fact that Khalid is a major hero in the historical traditions of Iraq certainly suggests ties there that can only have come from his early participation in its conquest. March to Syria. All early Islamic narratives agree that Abu Bakr ordered Khalid to depart Iraq for Syria to help Muslim forces that were already present. According to most versions, the caliph's order was spurred by appeals for reinforcements from Muslim leaders in Syria. Khalid probably launched his march to Syria in early April 634. He left small Muslim garrisons in Iraq's captured cities under the general military direction of al-Mutanna ibn Harida. The chronology of events following Khalid's activities in Ain al-Tamr is unclear and confusing. According to Donner, Khalid conducted two further major operations before embarking on his march to Syria, which have frequently been confused by sources with events that transpired during the march. One of the operations targeted Dumat al-Jandal, while the other targeted the Namir and Taghlib tribes that lived along the western banks of the upper Euphrates Valley as far as the Balik tributary and the Jabal al-Bishri mountains northeast of Palmyra. It is unknown which engagement took place first, but both were Muslim endeavors to bring Medina's influence over the primarily nomadic Arab tribes of northern Arabia and the Syrian steppe. Khalid was ordered by Abu Bakr or requested by one of the campaign's leaders, al-Walid ibn Uqba, to reinforce the main commander Iyad ibn Ghanm's faltering siege of the oasis town. Its defenders were supported by nomadic allies from the Byzantine Confederate tribes, the Ghassanids, Tanukids, Salihids, Bara, and Banu Kalb. Khalid left Ain al-Tamr for Dumat al-Jandal, where the allied Muslim troops defeated the defenders in a fierce encounter. Khalid then murdered the town's Kindite commander, Yuqaydir, who had deserted from Medina following Muhammad's death, while Kalbite head Wadieh was spared thanks to the intercession of his Tamimite supporters in the Muslims' camp. The historians Michael Jan de Guge and Kaitani completely dispute the idea that Khalid conducted an expedition to Dumat al-Jandal following his Iraqi campaign, and that the city described in traditional sources was most likely the same name near Al-Hira. Historian Laura Vecchia Valieri considers their judgment logical and argues that it seems impossible that Khalid could have made such a detour which would have taken him so far out of his way while delaying the accomplishment of his mission, to join the Muslim armies in Syria. According to Valieri, the oasis was seized by Iyad ibn Ghanm or possibly Amr ibn al-Az, who had previously been tasked during the Ridda Wars with defeating Wadieh, who had locked himself in Dumat al-Jandal. Crone, rejecting Khalid's role in Iraq entirely, claims that Khalid definitively captured Dumat al-Jandal in the 631 war and then crossed the desert to engage in the Syrian invasion. Itineraries and the Desert March. Most traditional accounts agree that Khalid's general march to Syria began in al-Hira, with the exception of al-Baladuri, who places it at Ain al-Tamr. According to the sources, the phase of the general march known as the Desert March occurred at an unknown stage after al-Hira left. Khalid and his troops, numbering between 500 and 800, marched from a spring called Quacker over a huge length of waterless desert for 6 days and 5 nights until they arrived at a source of water called Sowa. Because his men did not have enough water skins to travel this distance with their horses and camels, Khalid had some 20 of his camels increase their typical water intake and seal their mouths to prevent the camels from eating and thus spoiling the water in their stomachs. Each day of the march, he had a number of the camels slaughtered so his men could drink the water stored in the camels' stomachs. Khalid's advisor, Rafi ibn Amr of the Tay, advised him on how to use camels as water storage and where to find the water source in Sowa. Except for the aforementioned operations in Dumat al-Jandal and the upper Euphrates Valley, the traditional accounts agree on only 2 events of Khalid's route to Syria after leaving al-Hira, the desert march between Quacker and Sowa, and a subsequent raid against the Bara tribe at or near Sowa, as well as operations that resulted in Palmyra's submission. Otherwise, they diverge in tracing Khalid's itinerary. Based on these tales, Donner presents 3 plausible paths for Khalid to Damascus, 2 via Palmyra from the north and 1 via Dumat al-Jandal from the south. According to Kennedy, the sources are equally certain in their promotion of their different itineraries, and there is simply no knowing which version is correct. In the initial Palmyra-Damascus route, Khalid marches up the Euphrates, passing through previously decreased areas, to Jabal al-Bishri, and then southwestward through Palmyra, al-Qaryatain, and Huwaran before arriving in Damascus. The only section of this route where a desert march may have occurred is between Jabal al-Bishri and Palmyra, albeit the distance between the two is much shorter than a 6-day march and features a number of water sources. The second Palmyra-Damascus route connects al-Hira and Palmyra via Ain al-Tamr. The desert between Ain al-Tamr and Palmyra is long enough to support a 6-day march and has few watering holes, yet there are no place names that may be translated as Quacker or Sowa. Such place names occur on the Dumat al-Jandal-Damascus road, particularly the places of Kulban Qurajir, related with Quacker near the eastern side of Wadi Sirhan, and Sab Bayar, identified with Sowa 150 kilometers, 93 miles, east of Damascus. The distance between the 2 sites is dry, consistent with the 6-day march tale. The Desert March is the most well-known chapter of Khalid's expedition, and medieval Futu, Islamic conquests, literature in general. Kennedy claims that the Desert March has been enshrined in history and legend. Arab texts praised Khalid's endurance, but modern academics regard him as a strategist. He claims that Khalid certainly embarked on the march, a memorable feat of military endurance, and that his arrival in Syria was an important component of the success of Muslim arms there. According to historian Moshe Gil, the march was a feat which has no parallel and a monument to Khalid's qualities as an outstanding commander. According to historian Ryan J. Lynch, Khalid's Desert March is a literary construct created by Islamic tradition authors to form a narrative linking the Muslim conquests of Iraq and Syria and portraying the conquests as a well-calculated, singular affair, in line with the author's alleged polemical motives. According to Lynch, the march story, which would have excited and entertained Muslim audiences, was created out of fragments of social memory by inhabitants who attributed the conquests of their towns or areas to Khalid as a means to earn a certain degree of prestige through association with the famous general. Conquest of Syria. According to most traditional accounts, the first Muslim forces deployed to Syria from Medina in 13 AH, early spring 634. The Muslim troops were commanded by Amr ibn al-As, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, Shurabil ibn Hazana, and Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, though the latter may not have been dispatched to Syria until after Umar's ascension to the caliphate in the summer of 634, following Abu Bakr's death. According to Donner, the conventional sources' dates for the deployment of the first Muslim armies to Syria were several months off. It most likely took place in the autumn of 633, which is more consistent with the anonymous Syriac chronicle of 724, which dates the first fight between Muslim forces and Byzantines to February 634. By the time Khalid left Iraq, the Muslim soldiers in Syria had already engaged in a number of skirmishes with small Byzantine garrisons, dominated the southern Syrian countryside, but had no influence over any urban areas. Khalid was named the overall commander of the Muslim army in Syria. Abu Bakr named Khalid supreme commander as part of his relocation from Iraq to Syria, according to accounts cited by al-Baladuri, al-Tabari, Ibn Atham, al-Fasawi, d. 987, and Ibn Hubaysh al-Asadi. These accounts highlight the general's military prowess and record. While Athamana says, it is inconceivable that a man like Amr ibn al-As would agree to such a decision voluntarily, a single source in al-Baladuri instead credits Khalid's appointment to a consensus among the commanders already in Syria. It's possible that Umar acknowledged Khalid as supreme commander upon his ascension. Khalid's army crossed the desert and arrived in the meadow of Marj Rahit, north of Damascus. Donner believes that the majority of historic sources indicate the uncommonly precise date of April 24, 634, which is Easter Day of that year, as the likely date of his arrival. There, Khalid launched an Easter-themed attack on a group of Ghassanids before he or his deputy commanders invaded the Ghouta agricultural region surrounding Damascus. Later, at Basra, southeast of Damascus, Khalid gathered together with the leaders of the preceding Muslim forces, with the exception of Amr. Muhammad had visited Basra when he was younger. Basra, along with the Hauran region in which it is located, had historically provided wheat, oil, and wine to the nomadic tribes of Arabia. After the Sasanian retreat in 628, the Byzantines might not have rebuilt an imperial force in the city, and the Muslim armies faced little opposition during their siege. 116, Basra became the first significant city in Syria to fall to the Muslims when it submitted in late May of 634. In July, Khalid and the Muslim leaders traveled to Palestine to fight alongside Amr in the Battle of Ajnadain, which was the first significant conflict with the Byzantines. The Muslims emerged victorious in this conflict, and the Byzantines withdrew towards Pella, also known as Fal in Arabic, a significant city situated east of the Jordan River. Following them, the Muslims won a significant victory at the Battle of Fal. However, it's not clear if Amr or Khalid was in overall command during the conflict. Damascus siege. From Ajnadain and Fal, the remaining Byzantine soldiers withdrew northward to Damascus, where their commanders requested imperial reinforcements. Khalid proceeded, and at the plain of Marj al-Safar he may have defeated a Byzantine detachment before besieging the city. Khalid was stationed at Bab Sharki, the east gate, and each of the 5 Muslim commanders was tasked with blocking one of the city's entrances. Byzantine Emperor Heraclius's rescue soldiers were repelled by a 6th contingent stationed at Barzeh, just north of Damascus, Art 575 to 641. Numerous customs recount the Muslims' conquest of Damascus. The most widely accepted version is that of Ibn Asakir, died in 1175, a Syrian-born author from Damascus, who claims that Khalid and his soldiers broke through the Bab Sharki gate. At Bab Sharki, Khalid and his soldiers slaughtered the guards and other defenders by scaling the eastern walls of the city. Following discussions with prominent Damascene figures led by Mansur ibn Sarjun, a high-ranking city official, Muslim soldiers under Abu Ubaidah had entered peacefully from the western Bab al-Jabiyah gate while his forces advanced from the east. The terms of capitulation were negotiated when the Muslim soldiers gathered in the city center. However, according to al-Baladuri, Abu Ubaidah forcefully invaded from the west, whereas Khalid entered amicably from Bab Sharki. Current research inquiries arrival of Abu Ubaidah in Syria at the period of the siege. The stories listed above were questioned by Kaitani, and Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan was replaced by Abu Ubaidah in the Orientalist work Henri Lamens. According to the accounts of the Melkite patriarch Eutychius of Alexandria, d. 940, and the Syriac author Dionysius of Tel Mar, d. 845, the Damascenes under Mansur, tired of the siege and convinced of the besiegers' resolve, approached Khalid at Bab Sharqi and offered to open the gate in exchange for guarantees of safety. Accepting, Khalid gave the order to create a capitulation deal. Early Muslim and Christian sources mention Khalid's pact in a number of ways, but they all largely agree that the residents' lives, properties, and churches were required to pay the poll tax, known as jizya, in exchange for protection. The Muslims seized estates belonging to the imperial family. The pact most likely served as the template for the agreements established during the early Muslim conquests in Syria, Iraq, and Egypt about submission. While all the stories quoted by Ibn Ishaq and al-Waqidi, d. 823, agree that Damascus fell in August or September of 635, they give different dates for the siege, ranging from 4 to 14 months. Battle of Yarmouk. Khalid retreated his army from Damascus to the former Ghassanid city of Jabiya in the Golan in the spring of 636. He was provoked by the approach of a sizable Byzantine army sent by Heraclius, which included frontier troops, such as Christian Arab light cavalry under the command of the Ghassanid Philarch Jabala ibn Alayham and Armenian auxiliaries under the command of a certain Georgius, known to the Arabs as Jaraja. Various modern historians debate the numbers of the forces. Donner asserts that the Byzantines outnumbered the Muslims 4-1, while Walter E. Kagi states that the Byzantines probably enjoyed numerical superiority with a force of at least 15,000 to 20,000 soldiers. And John Walter Jandora maintains that with the Muslims numbering 36,000 soldiers, including 10,000 from Khalid's army, and the Byzantines numbering roughly 40,000, there was probably near parity in numbers between the two sides. West of the Muslim defenses at Jabiya, the Byzantine army camped near the Ruqad tributary. As a result, Khalid withdrew and positioned himself north of the Yarmouk River, near the confluence of the Ruqad and the Yarmouk. The region included traditional Ghassanid pastures, high hilltops, water sources, and vital highways linking Damascus to the Galilee. The Muslims defeated the Byzantines in a skirmish outside Jabiya on July 23, 636, and maintained the strategically important high ground between Adriat, modern-day Dara, and their camp near Deir Ayyub for more than a month. According to Jandora, the Christian Arab and Armenian allies of the Byzantines turned on or defected, but the Byzantine force itself remained formidable, with heavy cavalry in the lead and infantry in the rear as they advanced on the Muslim defense lines. To prevent his forces from being encircled by the Byzantine heavy cavalry, Khalid divided his horsemen into two main units and placed them behind the Muslims' left and right infantry wings. In order to strengthen the center of his defensive line, he deployed an elite squadron of 200 to 300 horsemen, and he left archers in the Muslims' camp near Deir Ayyub, where they would be most useful in fending off an approaching Byzantine force. After the Byzantines' early attacks on the Muslims' right and left flanks failed, they maintained their momentum until the entire Muslim line retreated, or pretended to retreat, according to modern Christian sources. After pursuing the Muslims into their camp, the Byzantines found that the Muslims had hampered their camel herds, creating a number of defensive perimeters that the infantry could fight from and that the Byzantine cavalry could not easily breach. Consequently, the Byzantines' left flank was exposed, their impetus was stopped, and they were left open to attack by Muslim archers. Taking advantage of the space between the Byzantine infantry and cavalry, Khalid and his horsemen penetrated the left flank of the Byzantines. Although Khalid surrounded the opposition heavy cavalry on both sides, he purposefully left a gap that would only allow the Byzantines to flee north, away from their infantry. Theophanes, a 9th-century Byzantine historian, claims that the Byzantine infantry rebelled under Vahan, most likely as a result of Theodore's inability to repel the horse charge. And then the infantry was crushed. In the meantime, the Byzantine cavalry withdrew northward, to the region situated between the rivers of Ruqad and Alan. Sending a force after them to stop them from regrouping was Khalid's idea. He then carried out an offensive during the night to capture control of the Ruqad bridge, which served as the Byzantines' only practical escape route. On August 20th, the Muslims then attacked the Byzantine camps, slaughtering the majority of the Byzantine soldiers or inciting fear within the Byzantine lines, leading to thousands of deaths in the ravines of Yarmouk as the Byzantines attempted to flee west. Jandora attributes the Muslim victory at Yarmouk to the unity and better leadership of the Muslim army, especially Khalid's ingenuity, as opposed to the general discontent within the ranks of the Byzantine army and Theodorus's conventional tactics, which Khalid rightly predicted. Gill believed that Khalid's retreat from the Heraclius army, Damascus evacuation, and counteroffensive on the Yarmouk tributaries all demonstrate his excellent organizational skills and his skill at maneuvering in the battlefield. The Byzantine defeat destroyed their last strong army in Syria, securing earlier Muslim gains in Transjordan and Palestine. It also cleared the way for Abu Ubaidah to recapture Damascus in December, as well as the conquest of the Bekaa Valley and eventually the entirety of Syria to the north. Yarmouk was considered by Jandora to be among the most important battles of world history, since it resulted in Muslim conquests that extended the caliphate between Central Asia and the Pyrenees Mountains. Demotion. Depending on the account, Khalid remained the chief leader of the Muslim armies in Syria for a period ranging from 6 months to 2 years after the establishment of Umar's caliphate. Most contemporary historians concur that Khalid's dismissal by Umar most likely happened following Yarmouk. Khalid was placed under the leadership of one of Abu Ubaidah's lieutenants after the caliph named Abu Ubaidah in Khalid's place and transferred the majority of Khalid's previous forces to Iraq by a subsequent decree. The earliest Islamic accounts list a variety of reasons why Khalid was removed from the position of supreme authority. These included his autonomy in making decisions and his lack of cooperation with Medina's leadership, previous charges of immorality, such as his killing of Malik ibn Nuwayra and his marriage to Malik's widow, claims of giving away large sums of loot to tribal nobility at the expense of qualified early converts to Islam, personal enmity between Khalid and Umar's concern that Khalid's hero status among Muslims would turn into a personality cult. The modern historians Andreas Stratos, William Muir, and de Guge believed that Khalid's removal was partly due to Umar's animosity for him. Although Shaban admits the animosity, he says it had no influence on the caliph's choice. De Guge rejects the notion that Khalid's opulent gifts to the tribal nobility, a custom shared by Muhammad and other early Muslim leaders, were the reason for his downfall. According to the theories put forth by Muir, Becker, Stratos, and Philip K. Hiddey, Khalid was finally removed from office because the Muslim conquests in Syria following Yarmouk necessitated the replacement of a military leader at the head of state with an accomplished administrator like Abu Ubaidah. With the argument that the cause must have been vital during a period when Heraclius had not abandoned the province and a significant portion of Syria was still under Byzantine rule, Athamina casts doubt on all of the previously stated theories. According to Athamina, Abu Ubaidah would not have been regarded as a worthy replacement for Khalid's incomparable talents because of all his military limitations. The inability of Medina to maintain a regular standing army, the necessity of transferring troops to other fronts, and the Byzantine threat to Muslim victories in Syria necessitated the creation of a defense system based on the more established Arab tribes in Syria that had previously been Byzantine confederates. Following the rejection of Medina's pleas to the Ghassanids, the main confederate, relationships were forged with the Kalb, Judham, and Lakhm. The vast majority of non-Arab tribesmen in Khalid's army were probably seen by these tribes as a challenge to their influence both politically and economically. Due to tribesmen arriving from the Iraqi front or Arabia, Khalid's original force of 500 to 800 men had increased to as high as 10,000 and as high as 30,000 to 40,000 when their families were taken into account. As a courtesy to the Kalb and their supporters, Umar sacked Khalid and brought back his men from Syria, according to Athamina. Activities in the northern region of Syria. From Damascus, Abu Ubaidah and Khalid headed north to Homs, which the Byzantines called Emesa, and they likely besieged the city in the winter of 636 to 637. The Byzantine defenders launched several sorties during the siege, but the city ultimately surrendered in the spring. As per the terms of surrender, the residents were taxed in exchange for assurances that their land, churches, water mills, and city walls would be protected. A section of the St. John Church was set aside for Muslim usage, while Khalid or Abu Ubaidah took possession of deserted homes and gardens to give to the Muslim soldiers and their families. Homs was considered an advantageous location for Arab tribesmen to settle because of its closeness to the desert steppe. As a result, it was the first city in Syria to have a sizable Muslim population. There is little and sometimes conflicting information available regarding the later conquests in northern Syria. Abu Ubaidah sent Khalid to take the surrounding Aleppo and Kinisrin, which the Byzantines called Chalcis. In the outskirts of Kinisrin, Khalid routed an army of Byzantines under the command of a certain Minas. After they appealed and claimed to be Arabs who had been forcibly enlisted by the Byzantines, Khalid spared the locals. He then besieged Kinisrin, a walled town, which eventually fell in August or September of 638. The first Muslim foray into Byzantine Anatolia was subsequently carried out by him and Iyad ibn Gan. Khalid and his spouse relocated to Kinisrin, which became their headquarters. In 638, Khalid was named deputy governor of Kinisrin under Abu Ubaidah. The conquest of northwest Syria as a result of the operations against Homs and Kinisrin forced Heraclius to relocate his headquarters from Edessa to Samosata in Anatolia and then to Constantinople, the imperial capital. It's possible that Khalid took part in the siege of Jerusalem, which ended in 637 or 638. He was one of the witnesses, according to Al-Tabari, of a letter that Umar wrote to Jerusalem's Patriarch Sophronius assuring the security of the city's citizens and assets. Death and dismissal. Sef ibn Umar reports that later in 638 Khalid was said to have given generously away battle booty from his campaigns in northern Syria, including a payment to the Kindite aristocrat al-Ashadih ibn Qais. As a result, Umar gave the order for Abu Ubaidah to publicly question Khalid, remove him from his position regardless of the interrogation's conclusion, and place Kinisrin under Abu Ubaidah's direct command. After being questioned in Homs, Khalid gave separate goodbye speeches to the soldiers in Homs and Kinisrin before Umar called him to Medina. According to Sef's account, Umar sent notice to the Muslim garrisons in Syria and Iraq, explaining that Khalid was fired not because of any irregularities but rather because he was afraid the troops had become captivated by illusions on account of him, Khalid, and that they would put an undue amount of trust in him instead of God. Legacy. The reason behind the lack of public outcry following Khalid's sacking could be that the Muslim public was already aware of Umar's animosity toward Khalid, which helped to prepare them for his removal, or it could have been the general animosity toward the Maksums stemming from their previous opposition to Hazrat Muhammad, as well as the initial Muslims. According to Ibn Asakir, Khalid was sacked by Umar at a council of the Muslim army in Jabiyah in 638 because he had lavished war booty on tribal nobles, war heroes, and poets rather than setting aside the money for Muslims in need. The only commander present who objected was a Maksumite who charged Umar with going against the military order that Muhammad had given to Khalid. Before his death in 639, Abu Ubaidah named Khalid and Iyad ibn Gan as his successors, according to the Muslim jurist al-Zuri, d. 742. However, Umar confirmed only Iyad as governor of the Homs, Kinisrin, Jazira district and named Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan governor over the rest of Syria, namely the districts of Damascus, Jordan, and Palestine. Khalid passed away in 21 AH, about 642 CE, at Medina or Homs. According to purported hadiths, Muhammad urged Muslims not to harm Khalid and predicted that despite Khalid's enormous contributions to Islam, he would suffer injustices. In Islamic literary narratives, Medina's women collectively grieve Umar's death and express regret for having dismissed Khalid. Athamana believes that all of them are no more than latter-day expressions of sympathy on the part of subsequent generations for the heroic character of Khalid as portrayed by Islamic tradition. Family and claimants of descent. Khalid's kunya, patronymic, Abu Sulayman, father of Sulayman, derives from the name of his first son, Sulayman. Asma, the daughter of eminent Qatham clan poet and leader Anas ibn Mudrik, was married to Khalid. As the son of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the governor of Syria and eventually the founder and first caliph of the Umayyad Caliphate, Abd al-Rahman rose to prominence as a commander in the Arab-Byzantine wars and was close to the latter as the deputy governor of the Homs, Kinisrin, Jazira area. Muhajir, another son of Khalid, fought alongside Ali in the Battle of Siffin in 657 during the First Muslim Civil War. Ali ruled as caliph from 656 to 661. Muhajir's son Khalid attempted to exact revenge for his uncle's murder after Abd al-Rahman's death in 666, supposedly due to poisoning under Muawiyah's orders. Khalid was jailed, but Muawiyah eventually freed him once Khalid paid the blood money. In 668 or 669, Khalid, the son of Abd al-Rahman, led a naval expedition against the Byzantines. The historical record does not contain any further noteworthy roles that members of Khalid's family have played. The historian Ibn Hazm of the 11th century states that his male line of ancestry terminated with the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate in 750 or soon after, when all 40 of his male descendants perished in an epidemic in Syria. So, Ayyub ibn Salama, the great-grandson of Khalid's brother al-Walid ibn al-Walid, received his family's holdings, including his home and a number of other dwellings in Medina. At least until the late 9th century, Ayyub's family were in possession of them. The 13th century historian Ibn Khallikan points out that the claim challenged the majority among Arabic historians and genealogists that Khalid's line of descent ended in the early Islamic period. The family of the Arab poet Ibn al-Kaysirani, who lived in the 12th century, claimed descent from Muhajir ibn Khalid. According to the 15th century Sufi religious leader Siraj al-Din Muhammad ibn Ali al-Makhzumi of Homs, a female line of ancestry may have survived. The Isfandiyarid leader Kazil Ahmed Bey, who governed an Anatolian principality until it was annexed by the Ottomans, made up his dynasty's lineage from Khalid. Sher Shah, an Indian prince from the 16th century, had the Sur tribe, who also claimed genealogy from Khalid. Homs Mausoleum. Beginning in Syria during the Ayyubid era, 1182 to 1260, Homs gained notoriety as the site of the supposed tomb and mosque of Khalid. Ibn Jubair, a pilgrim from the 12th century, reported that Khalid and his son Abd al-Rahman were buried in the tomb. Khalid's tomb has since been located in the city according to Muslim tradition. The first Ayyubid Sultan Saladin, Arf 1171 to 1193, and the 13th century both made changes to the structure. In an effort to connect his own military prowess with Khalid's, the Mamluk Sultan Baybars, Art 1260 to 1277, had a self-honoring inscription engraved on Khalid's monument in Homs in 1266. The Muslim scholar Abd al-Ghani al-Nabulsi acknowledged during his visit to the tomb in the 17th century that Khalid was buried there. But he also mentioned an other Islamic narrative that said Khalid ibn Yazid was the grandson of Muawiyah. The current mosque was reconstructed by the Ottoman rulers in 1908. Early records credit Khalid as being the most successful commander of the conquests, even after he was removed from the position of overall leadership. Donner refers to him as one of the tactical geniuses of the early Islamic period. Humphreys characterizes him as possibly the most famous and brilliant Arab general of the Ridda Wars and the early conquests, while historian Karel Hillenbrand refers to him as the most famous of all Arab Muslim generals. According to Kennedy, Khalid was a ruthless, brilliant military commander, but one with whom the more devout Muslims could never feel entirely comfortable. The early Islamic texts give a mixed picture of Khalid despite acknowledging his military prowess because of his early encounter with Muhammad at Uhud. His military reputation, which unsettled the devout early converts, and his reputation for using harsh or excessive measures against Arab tribesmen during the Ridda Wars. Historian Richard Blackburn claims that Khalid's reputation as Islam's most formidable warrior throughout the times of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, and the conquest of Syria has grown despite attempts in the early sources to denigrate him. According to Kennedy, his reputation as a great general has lasted through the generations and streets are named after him all over the Arab world. While many Shia Muslims see Khalid as a war criminal for his death of Malik ibn Nuwayra and his widow's marriage to him right away, which violated the customary Islamic grief time, Khalid is revered as a war hero by Sunni Muslims. We poured our hearts and souls into each frame, hoping to take you on a mesmerizing journey through time. We're glad to hear your opinions. Did you enjoy the video? Was it informative, interesting, or perhaps even inspirational? We would love to hear from you in the comments section below. And, if you haven't already, please consider joining our community by subscribing to our channel. And, if you haven't already, please consider joining our community by subscribing to our channel. By clicking the bell button, you'll be kept up to speed on all of our latest releases, ensuring that you never miss out on another intriguing journey into the past. But wait, there's more. We want to hear from you. Do you have a particular historical topic that piques your interest? Leave us a comment with your thoughts, and who knows? Your suggestion may be the inspiration for our next video. So, friends, when you say goodbye, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to go on this historic trip alongside you. Until next time, be interested, stay connected, and continue to discover the treasures of our shared past. Cheers!